Welcome to the Fundamental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Paul Saladino. This podcast is the result of my relentless search to understand and correct the roots of chronic disease and illness. In this podcast, I will share with you everything I have learned about how to live the most healthy and radical life possible. Thanks for joining me on this journey. What's shaking, everybody? This is a fun one this week. They're all fun. I know they're all fun. I always say they're all fun, but this is a really cool one. This one is the Deuterium episode. It's out of Star Wars. It's out of nuclear reactors. It is really, really interesting. Deuterium, as you will learn in this episode, we will go into all these details, is a heavy form of hydrogen. It is a hydrogen atom that has a proton and a neutron in the nucleus instead of just a proton in the nucleus and one electron. So it's a doubly weighted hydrogen molecule that can form heavy water, which has historically been used in nuclear bombs and nuclear reactors. And as you'll learn in this episode, there's some really solid science here to show that elevated levels of deuterium in our bodies can break the little nanomotors in our mitochondria. So you're probably saying, what is he talking about? It's all in the episode. Trust me, we'll go through all of it in detail. And on my website, there's a new blog post. So my website is carnivoremd.com. If you go to carnivoremd.com/deuterium, which is DEUTERIUM, you will find the blog post about deuterium, which will give you more information, links to a very informative YouTube video from Dr. Laszlo Boros, who is associated with the Center for Deuterium Depletion, which is where I went for this episode. So I went to Los Angeles. I got to hang out with Dr. Q Collins and a number of others at the Center for Deuterium Depletion there, and we dropped a bomb. We dropped so many cool knowledge bombs. It was so interesting hanging out with them and learning about the stuff. So another interesting thing that you'll probably be wondering about in this episode is how do you get your deuterium level checked? If you go to the Center for Deuterium Depletion's website, which is ddcenters.com, you will find a link there entitled the Nose to Tail Study Details. This is linked on my website. It's linked in the blog post on my website on deuterium. The Center for Deuterium Depletion and I have partnered to do a nose-to-tail carnivore deuterium study. And in this study, we're going to be looking at the deuterium levels of people on carnivore diets or ketogenic diets or whatever diet you want. But the cool thing about this study is they're offering significantly discounted rates on the Determinator test kit, which is how you can determine your deuterium levels. This retails for $325. They're going to let people connected with this study and me and this podcast get it for $150. And they're also going to give you a premium app called Calorie Mama AI app, which retails for $80 with this, and enter you in a drawing for a Juve Light rental for 30 days. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to follow people on a carnivore diet, we're going to log food, and we're going to look at deuterium levels moving forward. If you don't want to be in the study, you don't have to be. You can participate in the study and log your stuff. You can participate in the study and just get your deuterium level checked for the cheaper price. But if you go to the link in the blog post, you will find this. You can also use the code SALADINO, SALADINO, on the Center for Deuterium Depletion website to get discounts on consults. I think you can use it to get a discount on the Determinator test kit, although I don't think it'll be as cheap as if you participate in the nose-to-tail carnivore study. So do that if you want to get your deuterium level checked. I had my level checked. Listen to the back end of the podcast where I will talk about my deuterium level, what I found, what I've done to decrease it. And I think you guys will learn a ton in this episode about deuterium. Again, check out the blog post if you have questions. And thank you so much to the folks at the Center for Deuterium Depletion, ddcenters.com, for hanging out with me and teaching me all this stuff. There's so much on my website. So also on carnivoremd.com, you should sign up for my newsletter, The Fundamental Health Insider. It's rad. Of course it's rad. It's mine. And I'm going to talk about all kinds of cool stuff, share an article that I like every week, talk about what's happening with me, talk about who is coming on the podcast, and share special offers only for insiders there. So sign up for my newsletter, check out my website, check out the carnivoremd.com/deuterium blog post, and prepare to have your minds blown about deuterium. This episode is amazingly, incredibly sponsored by White Oak Pastures. These guys are incredible. You can use the code CarnivoreMD at their website for 10% off your offer through the end of this month. In fact, that code is going to go through, I think, the first week of October. and you will be able to get access to all of their amazing grass-fed, grass-finished, traditionally raised foods, pork, pastured pork, chickens, chicken eggs, grass-fed beef. They have lamb. It's all so well made, you guys. We are actually going to organize a trip to White Oak Pastures for the carnivore keto community. I'll be posting about it soon. It's going to be the weekend of the 13th and 14th, maybe the 14th, 15th in December. We're going to go. I'm going to hang out there. I'm going to record a podcast there. I want to see you guys all there. There's going to be more about that soon. But White Oak Pastures is a 6th generation farm, 150 years. They are revitalizing Bluffton, Georgia. They are carbon negative. They sequester more carbon than they produce. And they produce some of probably what I would say are probably the most high quality animal products on the planet. They are so intentional about this. Check them out. I'm so happy to be partnering with them. And I'm going to continue to support their work for so many reasons. They're good people. They have amazing, beautiful Southern accents. And they are the kindest souls ever. And Carnivore MD will get you 10% off their amazing stuff. If you live on the West Coast, it's tricky. We're working on getting faster, cheaper shipping out here. But if you're anywhere else in the country, you're going to have no problems with getting shipping. West Coast shipping for White Oak is a little dicey. So just keep that in mind. The podcast is also sponsored by my boys, my girls at Ancestral Supplements. You guys know these guys. They make 100% grass-fed, desiccated, freeze-dried organ supplements from New Zealand. They're amazing people and they do good work. And these supplements are fantastic for those of us when we're traveling, if we don't want to do organ meats, if we don't have access to organ meats. There are so many good things. They do liver, brain, bone marrow, thymus, pancreas, all kinds of cool stuff. I think that one of the ones I've been super stoked about recently is the thymus supplement. Thymus is an immune gland. It's also very high in vitamin C, and I have been taking it regularly and really appreciate this one. So check out Ancestral Supplements. They have such a great message. AncestralSupplements.com. You can use the code SaladinoMD at their Shopify site to get 10% off, and they will know that I sent you. Amazing people. They are putting back in what the modern world has left out. They are really helping all of us appreciate the importance of eating nose to tail, which, as you know, I am so jazzed about. So without further ado, on to the episode. Put on your Brainiac caps. This is a good one. You guys are going to learn a ton. I appreciate you all. Q and Anne, thanks for coming to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Paul. It's great to be here with you.
Same thing, Paul.
We have been hanging out in Los Angeles for the last at least 2 hours, geeking out on some amazing stuff. And I've had my mind blown. We had the biochemistry textbook out. I was drinking deuterium depleted water. We were on the internet researching record crossings of the Atlantic Ocean by rowers drinking MCT oil. We've been talking about metabolic water and deuterium. And so I'm so excited to actually turn the recorder on. There is so often in podcasts that all the good stuff or a lot of the good stuff happens before, but we're going to turn the recorder on. We're just going to start recording. I would really love to hear right from the bat a little bit about some of the success stories that you guys have seen in your clinic, because right before we started, you were telling me some anecdotes of patients that you've worked with. I know you've done clinical work with over 10,000 patients in your practice, and it's now called the Center for Deuterium Depletion. Share with me some of these stories, guys, so that people listening will have a sense of what you do here and the ways in which this type of a therapy can be pretty incredibly beneficial for people with all sorts of diseases.
All right. Now, I know that one of our very first patients came to us with stage 4 breast cancer, metastasis to the bone. And this is a woman who was willing to really look outside the box and try all sorts of things, had undergone a lot of chemo and radiation and standard of care. And she was frail. She looked very ashen and gray and weak. She was 99 pounds, but she was determined to make sure she was going to find ways to continue on. And we started her on a deuterium depletion program, and she's been a very good patient. She's stuck with it. She was been in a wheelchair at some points, and her situation right now is she actually lives about 11 or 12 blocks from our office. She walks here. She has a walker, but she walks here for her treatment. And she also has given us reports of, after visiting her oncologist, that her oncologist has turned to her and said, wow, I really see what a lot of my patients, what the road they're going to have to go through. You don't even look like you have cancer. It has given us a lot of joy. It's very nice to see what's happened with her. And that's also, as a starting patient, it's given us a lot of confidence in what we can do. And we've seen a lot more since then.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll go through a few of them. Another stage 4 cancer patient who's one of my favorites, and her first name is Linda. And she came to us not able to get out of bed, tired, been told there was nothing else they could do. And we started her, and the first thing I promised her, I said, Linda, you're going to get better. And when you get better, we're going dancing. I didn't know she was married at the time, but that's okay. So her husband said he's going to go too. But Linda is just so awesome now. We got a report on using our MRI, and we got a report that she actually has no cancer in her body at all anymore. The only thing that's left is residual arthritis.
What type of cancer did she have?
She had stage 4 breast cancer with metastasis to the lung.
So these are 2 patients with stage 4 breast cancer that have done incredibly well.
Yeah. And another one, Greg. Greg is a super guy, very athletic. Again, we met him. He was told his doctor said it was all. They couldn't do anything for him anymore. Greg started with the deuterium depletion protocol, learning how to breathe, learning when to go outside. Now Greg plays 12 hours of golf a day. Yeah, advanced prostate, stage 4, also metastasis, but he's plays golf every day.
12 hours a day?
12 hours a day. I can't stop
12 hours of golf?
He's a beast. He's a beast. He gets up at 5 and 6 to play 2 18-round holes of golf. He's amazing. Wow. And he teaches quarterbacks. He's just an amazing guy. And we have another young patient who is a brain tumor patient, stage 3. But he's doing it's so gratifying because he's a young kid and he's going to have his life in front of him again. The cancer stopped. We're now going to the point we're trying to rebuild his brain. And I think one other thing, while those are all great, those are all late stages, what we really try to get patients to do is go through deuterium depletion so they can enjoy the time they have. And that's the important thing. It's like they're not afraid of life anymore. They really, as we say, try to be a better you, and that's they're enjoying themselves. So that's just some of them, but every day we have them.
Early on, also, we had a young guy, 35 years old, with stage 4 colon cancer. We actually referred him to work together with an oncologist that works with us, and in a few months, I think it was only 4 to 6 months afterwards, his mother was writing me, so grateful, in remission. And he had told me, Dr. Cooper, I didn't have any of those horrible things that people had told me about that I was going to have, like, fatigue and not being able to think clearly. And we also have quite a few patients who have, for the second time now, decided that, the cancer has come back after going through a full series of standard of care, and they are very resistant to doing it again. I'll never do that again. And upon talking to us, especially Dr. Q, who has a lot of knowledge about both areas, Western medicine and what we do, has convinced them, yes, you are. You will go through this again. We are going to make you a much more sturdy, strong, robust person so that you can handle this treatment. And, just a few weeks ago, one of them called me and said, Anne, this is my second time around. This is my 7th chemotherapy session. I have no brain fog. I have lots of energy. I'm at work and everybody tells me I look great. Really nice story to hear.
And that highlights a very important point that I think is a very valuable thing to mention to people up front, that what you're doing here is not in replacement of the traditional cancer therapies. You're looking to augment those therapies and make people more robust when they're doing those therapies. The majority, it sounds like all of these patients you described did conventional cancer therapies, whether it was radiation, chemotherapy, debulking, et cetera, but they were doing it in the context of a deuterium depletion. They were doing deuterium depletion as they were doing this. So am I correct with that? That you're encouraging them to do traditional treatments of cancer and you're making them more robust while they're doing it so that it makes it easier for them to go through that. You're enhancing those therapeutics.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to say it. We're very into understanding. I mean, I've been there. I believe in throwing the whole kitchen sink at cancer when it's there. And so I would never tell anyone not to do it. At the same time, we do have early stage, in situ and also stage 0, stage 1 cancers that we can say that if you fix your metabolism, that's different. Maybe you can mitigate it and change it. So the right tools for the right time.
That's a great point. And I want to point out to people listening now that when we're talking about stages with cancer, this can get a little confusing. So I'll just try and highlight this. And in medicine, when we're talking about stages of cancer, the stage refers to how advanced the cancer is in terms of how far it's spread. Metastases that are distant are often higher stages of cancer. So when we were talking about patients with prostate or colon or breast cancer, or the gentleman with the astrocytoma, we were talking about stages. And so when people have higher stages of cancer, those cancers are bigger and they have progressed to more tissue, meaning they've often metastasized. Cancer can also be graded, and the grade has to do with the amount of the disordering of the cancer, the way it looks under a microscope, and sort of how aggressive the cancer looks histologically. So the gentleman with the brain cancer, you said he had a grade 3 astrocytoma. And so when we're looking at a cancer, an oncologist would say it has a certain grade, which is how aggressive the cancer is going to be, basically how it looks under a microscope. And then it has a stage, which is how far it's progressed.
Yes.
So it's quite impressive to have had all of these stories of patients who have had advanced stage cancer with metastases, large amounts of growth, have really good outcomes with combinations of conventional therapies and deuterium depletion. But hopefully that helps people understand what we're talking about when we say stage and grade for cancer.
Great. No, I'm impressed.
These are all very serious cancers. So at this point, people are probably wondering, what the heck is deuterium? And I did that purposefully because I think, a lot of podcasts start in this way and they say, let's talk about the deuterium. And I wanted you guys who are listening to understand that this is a really novel type of therapy. I'm so grateful to be here at the Center for Deuterium Depletion because there's not a lot of places doing this. In fact, I think this is the only place I'm aware of that does this. So let's back up about 20 steps. If those of you who are listening haven't been completely disoriented, you're probably thinking, this is really interesting. Let's back up and talk about some of the basics, all right? We're going to take you back to science school. So put in your thinking hat. We're going to talk about deuterium. We're going to talk about chemistry. We're going to talk about atoms and molecules. So let's start with the first question. What the heck is deuterium?
All right, I'll take it from there because I talk to patients every day and I wanted so much to share this information with them, but I knew I needed to do it so that it was easily understood. So I would just essentially start with water. We are essentially mostly made of water. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. And actually, there is another form of hydrogen. It is called deuterium, and it does occur naturally in our environment. The difference between hydrogen and its cousin, deuterium, is that deuterium does have an extra neutron, which just makes it twice as big and twice as heavy. And that can have consequences for us biologically. And we like to really go back and explain that, or that we can really work with people on the cellular level, which we feel is really important. We're not working on problems upstream. We're really going back to what is really the root of a lot of health conditions. So we need to understand a little bit about our cells. And each of our cells has, or most of them, not the red blood cells, but most of our cells have something that is called the mitochondria. Many people are hearing more and more about this now. It's becoming more well known. It's also called the powerhouse of the cell. And this little organelle that's inside our cells, the mitochondria, has thousands of tiny motors inside. We call them nanomotors. And these nanomotors actually rotate at about 9,000 RPM, which is faster than a Ferrari. And as they do this, they're actually making cellular energy. And cellular energy is required for all of our trillions of chemical and bio and physical reactions that's occurring in our body every second without us having to tell them what to do. So let's talk about the combination of deuterium and how it's affecting our cells. It does occur naturally, deuterium, in our environment, but it is accumulating more and more in our environment than it did past few decades. And we'll explain a little bit later why. But the consequences of having an overload of deuterium is it does make water. It's a hydrogen with a deuterium and an oxygen. So it actually can be called heavy water. I like to explain it like this. If you think of your car engine, if it has really thick, heavy, gluggy oil in it, it becomes a lot of resistance for your engine to go, and your car's not going to take you where you want to go. And what you would do about that is you would pour very thin oil in to dilute that heavy oil out so you can get the motor going again. Think of inside your cells. If it does accumulate an overload of deuterium or heavy water, those deuterium are larger. Remember, they're twice as big and twice as heavy, which once they get inside the mitochondria, they can actually break those little motors, which starts to slow down our energy production. And that energy, as I said, is required for everything that occurs in our body. So we need to really be aware of deuterium and the consequences of it slowing down our cellular energy.
I love it. And so what we're talking about here is atoms.
Yes, atoms.
Atoms. We're talking about atoms. And if people look at the periodic table of the elements, they'll see in the upper left-hand corner is the H. And that H has a 1. That's hydrogen. That is the simplest atom that we know of in the universe, right? And in the atom of hydrogen that I learned about in college, I was a chemistry major many moons ago, they would say the hydrogen has 1 proton in the nucleus and there's an electron kind of swirling around it. And, that's a basic explanation of the way atoms look. Since then, there have been all sorts of equations around quantum physics and the idea that there's actually particle probabilities of where the electron is going to be. And there's all sorts of complex ways to describe atoms and what makes up protons and what we're actually made of. But what we're talking about here, if I understand it correctly, is a hydrogen that has an extra molecule in the nucleus, and that's a neutron. And the difference between protons and neutrons is that protons have a positive charge and neutrons are neutral. And there are also these electrons, which are negative, and those kind of circulate around. So it's kind of like, it's like a molecule in the middle and then a bee buzzing around the outside. And people may remember from chemistry, this may be traumatic for people, that this is how atoms in our bodies work at some conceptualization. There are nuclei, and the nuclei have various amounts of electrons circulating around them. And so as you move up the periodic table, you gain more things in the nucleus and you gain more electrons in the different orbitals. And so a big atom has bigger nucleus and more electrons, but we're just talking about the simplest one here. And so if I understand it correctly, deuterium is an atom of of hydrogen that has a proton and a neutron and 1 electron. So it's doubly heavy because that neutron has weight. And so like you said, I love it. It's 2 cousins. And one is a thin cousin, and one is twice as tall and weighs twice as much, right? One is thin, and one is really big and muscular. It's kind of like me and Sean Baker, right? Sean Baker is twice the size of me. So I'm hydrogen, and he's deuterium. But I love Sean, so I don't... But is that a reasonable conceptualization?
Yeah, I love that. Just to think about it, and that there are a lot more of you than there are Seans. Because if you look in the world... there's out of every million hydrogens, only 155 of them are deuteriums. So you can say that they do exist, but they are relatively rare.
They're rare in the environment.
Yes, thank God.
And I think maybe the first time that people hear about this, they think, oh, that's crazy. That's just crazy talk. But what we're talking about here is real science. Deuterium is not a made up fairy tale. Deuterium is not a theoretical thing. As you mentioned, Anne, deuterium is used to make heavy water, right? And that's used to make nuclear bombs. And thankfully, people are not making as much heavy water anymore. We're not making as many nuclear bombs. But I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch G.I. Joe. And there was an episode of G.I. Joe where Cobra, the Cobra commander, the bad guy in G.I. Joe, was after heavy water. And they were trying to steal heavy water because they wanted to make a big bomb. And so heavy water, if I understand it correctly, is water made with deuterium. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's correct. Yes.
And that's what's used to make nuclear power or nuclear bombs, is that we can use that heavy water and we split that. And that's where the big atomic blast comes from. Boom.
Well, someone does that. We is not me included. But
Some
yes.
people have done that throughout existence, right? Okay. Right.
But it's actually a physical law. I mean, this is the way it is. Deuterium has been around forever. It is accumulating more now. But the way it interacts in our body is a matter of physics.
It's physics.
Yes.
It's real science.
And chemistry.
Yeah, this is real science. This is not unicorns, you guys. This is real science, okay? Now, there was actually a Nobel Prize awarded for the discovery of deuterium in 1934, right?
In 1934. It was discovered in 1931
Right.
by an American chemist.
And I think we looked up his name, Harold C. Urey.
Yes.
Because I wanted to be able to say it to people I didn't know before, but people can look that up. So he discovered it in 1931. He discovered this heavy molecule, this heavy isotope of hydrogen, So Sean Baker was discovered in 1931, right? Now,
And a Nobel Prize was awarded.
And a Nobel
for
Prize
discovering
was
it
awarded.
3 years later.
And a Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery of Sean Baker. So Q, before we recorded, you told me so where did all this come from? This goes back to the Big Bang, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we always tell people they're stars, and the reason is you're hydrogen. And when you think about the Big Bang was hydrogen becoming deuterium. And if you look at everything, as you go further and further out into the universe, you get a different ratio of hydrogen to deuterium, to where probably in the furthest reaches, there's more deuterium than there is hydrogen. Even on Mars, there's 8 times more deuterium than we have on Earth, which is a big problem when we start talking about planetary traveling.
Yeah, because Elon Musk wants to put people on Mars, right? This could be a real problem, and we'll tell people why. But so there's 8 times more deuterium on Mars.
Yes, and they know it, and we're talking right now about how we're going to keep them alive, and including them taking ketogenic diets, deuterium depleted water, MCT oil, and all these things, and shielding actually the rockets with exogenous ketones. So we're talking to them about a lot of crazy things that they have got to do.
Because there's so much deuterium on Mars that if people go to Mars, they'll be exposed to excess deuterium and will end up making heavy water and breaking the nanomotors, right?
Yes, and changing the 3-dimensional structures of their bones, and everything will still work. It's really, right now we're trying to figure a way to get them back,
right?
Which is very, very interesting.
So everybody listening is just saying, I had no idea this was a podcast about interstellar space travel. But that's what I do for you guys. We're talking about all kinds of stuff. And over here on the table, when I walked in, you guys let me hold rocks that are 600 million years old. Yes. There are these rocks on the table here that are 600 million years old. We'll get a photo and I'll post it on my Instagram. And so we were talking about sort of the grand scheme of so we went all the way back, right? As far as we understand now with science, there's a Big Bang, boom, bang. There's hydrogen, there's deuterium, and there's other isotopes of hydrogen created. And then, we get the formation of the Earth. How old do we think the Earth is?
So the Earth is 800 million years old, and this thing you're taking a picture of it is 600 billion years old.
So we've got a rock on the table that's 600 million years old. And I said, how much deuterium is in this rock? Is it more or less than now?
Much more.
Why is there more deuterium in this rock than we have on the Earth now?
Because the deuterium think of it as traveling someplace, and its journey hadn't started yet. So there's this confluence of things being moved from that bang part, moving out toward the inner reaches or outer reaches of the universe. So there are more deuterium back then than there are today.
Is that why outer reaches of the universe would have more deuterium potentially?
Yeah, more of a deuterium, and we're not going to even talk about the multiverse, so I don't even know.
I don't know anything about that.
We won't go there, but
okay. Okay. Well, let's just, this helps me think about it. Let's think about the Earth, right? We had the creation of the Earth 800 million years. These rocks are 600 million years old. Bacteria, 500 million years?
Yeah, right. It's after these rocks.
After these rocks. Bacteria, 500 million years. And around the time of bacteria was when you were saying we started to see oxygen on the face of the Earth.
Yeah, the oxygen, bacteria are one of the responsibilities for making this oxygen. So, So you start to see oxygen, you start to see these other, a level that was able to sustain who we are now, eukaryotes. But without that, we wouldn't be here.
Right, because our cellular respiration as eukaryotic organisms, meaning organisms with a nucleus that is bound by a membrane, requires oxygen.
Right.
And I want to tell people why in a moment. We'll talk about mitochondria and all this stuff. But just so people know, prokaryotic organisms are bacteria. These are organisms that have nuclear material that's just floating around the cell. It's just everywhere. It's like your son or daughter with a really messy room. Eukaryotic organisms have nuclear material that is chromatin, DNA, that is bound by a nuclear membrane. This is your son or daughter who has a very clean room, right? Well, sort of. At least all the stuff is organized to a specific bookshelf. So there are eukaryotic organisms and prokaryotic organisms. And simply speaking, humans are eukaryotic organisms. Bacteria are prokaryotic organisms. It gets a little more complicated. But one of these amazing things that we think happened was that at some point in this evolution 400 million years ago, one of these eukaryotic organisms gulped up a bacteria. And what did that become? What happened?
Yeah, so that's what's so cool. So that by gulping up that bacteria and that bacteria feeling really good about where it was going to be, instead of killing that eukaryote, actually made it better. It was able now to give it more energy. So before that, we couldn't use oxygen the way we use it today. We didn't make as much ATP, so we couldn't grow, or we couldn't multiply. And when I say we, I'm talking about the primordial we.
The primordial.
the goo.
Primordial cells, not humans. We're talking about primordial cells.
Which we got a great story about how we became humans too later on.
I love it.
But yeah, so without that step, we would not be able to make the energy we need to turn into the people that we are today.
So the bacteria gets taken up by this eukaryotic organism and goes, hey, I kind of like this. This is a good symbiosis. And there's tons of science. I don't know the science as well as I should, but basically if you look at a mitochondria, it has two membranes, right? There's an outer membrane and an inner membrane, which suggests, and if people are familiar with this concept of phagocytosis, this membrane of the outer of the eukaryotic organism kind of engulfs the bacteria, which has a membrane, and it might explain, or probably explains, why mitochondria have two membranes. Yeah. And so the prevailing thought now is that the mitochondria in our bodies, in every cell in our body except red blood cells, right? Every cell in our body has mitochondria except red blood cells, are related to a primordial bacteria.
That's correct.
450 million years ago.
And we're talking, and each one of those had these nanomotors and was talking. So we're talking about literally trillions of these. I mean, you have more nanomotors in your body than there are stars in the galaxy.
32,000 nanomotors in a mitochondria.
32,000 nanomotors in one mitochondria.
That's where all the whole crystal, because it comes on the back and round.
Right. So if people have seen a mitochondria, it looks like a bean, kind of. It's shaped like a bean, but the inner mitochondrial membrane has what are called cristae, which is what Anne just mentioned. And these are invaginations, or sort of folds of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And Anne is mentioning that on these inner cristae, on these folds, there are 32,000 nanomotors in one mitochondria. That's incredible. Okay, so how does energy work? Like, how do we make energy in our bodies? Because we're talking about ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the force. So people may not know this. Are you a Star Wars fan, Q?
Yeah, I'm a midichlorian.
Midichlorians!
There we go. We laugh about that because, we'll talk why it's called that. But yeah, matter of fact, they mention deuterium depletion facilities in both Star Trek and Star Wars.
When did they mention deuterium depletion?
We were sitting here. What the heck? So yeah.
So if people watch Star Wars, they'll hear people talking about midichlorians. Obi-Wan Kenobi talks to Luke Skywalker, and then in the newer versions, they talk about everyone has midichlorians in them, and these midichlorians are how we use the Force. And the Force is ATP.
That's
all right,
correct.
And midichlorians are mitochondria, right? I mean, this is my interpretation, but this is pretty much what they're talking about, which is the beauty of Star Wars. So how do we use the Force, Q?
Yeah,
how do we use the Force?
I love this question. And this is what's so much fun. So if you think about this, what happens is your body, when you eat food, your body, we've made this so complicated because we talk about glucose and proteins and fat. Your body doesn't care. Your body takes the hydrogens from your food, and it takes those hydrogens into your mitochondria, past nanomotors, and you can imagine it turning. It goes so fast that it turns these nanomotors about 9,000 revolutions per minute. And every time it turns a third of the way, it makes an ATP. And it makes this other thing called metabolic water. Now, the problem is that when it hits a deuterium, it's so big. Imagine this big guy sitting on a
Baker
seesaw.
can't fit through the nanomotor.
I love you, Sean, man. That's him, man. I love you, though. You know that. So every time it hits that nanomotor, it breaks it, and you can't make any more energy. And
also
so
acts like a little terrorist, and he pings off that one nanomotor onto the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah,
so a little bit can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. That's a good point. So you make all of this from the think about his. If you think about here, we're going to get a little geeky. If you think about science, if you could give it a weight, for you eat about 3.5 pounds of food to 4 pounds of food a day. Out of that, you make 68 pounds of energy.
Of ATP molecules?
68
pounds of ATP molecules.
And 2,000 gallons of water.
Of metabolic water.
Of metabolic water.
Now let's tell you what metabolic water is. Let's just actually take them through and tell them about the electron transport chain, TCA cycle, so they understand how it all happens.
Yeah, so it's...
We're getting geeky here, you guys.
Yeah, if you think about everything you think about, we have electrons from the electron transport chain. We get those electrons from the sun and from the food we eat, from earth, from grounding, and all these things that you've heard about. This is the way it really works. So it's not supposition. This is really science. And then we get the hydrogens from the food we eat. Those all go together to make this exquisite watch almost type of thing that all works together. But essentially, the important thing is that the hydrogens turn these nanomotors. Those nanomotors make ATP, and as they make ATP, it also in that mitochondria makes what we call metabolic water because it combines that hydrogen with the oxygen you breathe to make water. And that's what life is. Everything that you do is about that. Now, and then that also drags along with the electrons that come in. And you guys have heard about NAD and all these other things they're putting out. And it's an idea that it carries these electrons within the system along this whole TCA cycle. So it's all working as this beautiful, 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 almost like musical score together. But again, once you have this little terrorist, deuterium, hit that nanomotor, the music stops.
But it sounds like, and we'll talk about this a little later, deuterium isn't always a terrorist.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need it. So we'll talk about that later. Okay. So I want to just make sure people understand metabolism at like basic level. We eat carbohydrates, we eat protein, we eat fat. And all these molecules look different. And we had the biochemistry textbook out earlier today, and we were looking at the molecules. So these are all molecules, right? And molecules are composed of atoms. And both carbohydrates, which are polymers of glucose, which is a fundamental molecule, right? And proteins, which are polymers of amino acids, and fat, which are long chains of carbon. All these molecules have atoms, and the fat has carbon and hydrogen. Glucose has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and proteins have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And so there are all these molecules. So we're taking in these molecules, and these molecules give us electrons, and we can also get electrons from our environment. And we break down these glucose molecules, or these glucose polymers, we break them down into acetyl-CoA. And we also break down fats into acetyl-CoA. And if we're going to do gluconeogenesis, we're going to break down amino acids into acetyl-CoA, right?
Yes.
Yes, correct.
We're passing the microphone. Right. Okay. And that acetyl-CoA is made outside of the mitochondria, right? And then the acetyl-CoA is passed through the mitochondrial membranes into the mitochondria. Well, actually, don't we actually pass fats across the mitochondria via the carnitine shuttle?
Yes, both ways.
Both ways.
Both ways.
Okay.
It happens both ways.
But generally, when we're taking carbohydrates, we're making acetyl-CoA and we're passing it across the mitochondrial membrane. And then that acetyl-CoA goes into the inside of the primordial bacteria, which is where we see the TCA cycle or the Krebs cycle, right? There was another Nobel laureate, Albert Szent-Györgyi, who discovered two of the sort of intermediates in the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is the source of much consternation, but there's this interior cycle in the inside of the mitochondria where we are moving molecules around and making reducing intermediates or molecules like FADH2, NADH, which carry electrons to the electron transport chain. Am I doing good?
This is good, man.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Electron transport chain is in the cristae. It's in the inner mitochondrial membrane. And then our body shoots electrons through the electron transport chain. And as the body is shooting electrons through the electron transport chain, it's shuttling hydrogens into the inside of the mitochondria. It creates a gradient. And then you're getting a lot of hydrogen on the inside of the mitochondria. And that is the hydrogen that can either be regular hydrogen, which we haven't talked about, is also known as protium, or deuterium, right?
That's correct.
And those are the hydrogen atoms that are moving through the nanomotors with their concentration gradient. The nanomotor spinning and the ATP is being made. Did I get all that right?
Just give this guy an A.
Okay, all right.
Awesome.
Well, maybe a B. We'll be okay. It's interesting, since being out of medical school, I've had to relearn biochemistry and metabolism and think about it. We don't think about it at that level very often, but this is what makes us go. And so this is where deuterium comes into play, right? somehow when we're getting too much deuterium, it's accumulating in mitochondria, and as it's trying to go down that concentration gradient, it's breaking those nanomotors, right?
Right.
Okay. So we talked about a lot there, you guys. So here's the question. This is the $64,000 question that everyone is asking. How do we get too much deuterium? How are we getting deuterium? Why is it accumulating in some people? So where are we getting excess? Where do we get deuterium from in general? And where do we get excess deuterium from?
Yeah, I think it's two ways. That's a two-part question. So excess deuterium now is coming from the air we breathe, a lot more the way we grow food, the process we grow food. A lot of it's synthetic, a lot of it's GMO. A lot of it's just that it's watered now with river water instead of rainwater and water from mountains. So our agricultural. But more important than that is not only the levels are increasing, but our inability or our ability to deplete it is decreasing. And that's because all of these we have built within our, probably the most important thing that's built into your body, and there are 12, 15 different ways, is your ability to deplete deuterium, to get rid of it out of your body as fast as it comes in. And that comes from the way you sleep, the way you breathe, the way you walk, your skin, all these things we talk about all the time, your gut bacteria, all these things that are so popular in when we talk about wellness, and is really all about deuterium at its base. And so we're getting, as sick people, we all know we party too hard, we eat wrong, we're overweight, we don't sleep as well, we're under stress. All those things that are important for deuterium depletion, we don't do well anymore.
So there's really two sides to the equation. There's our ability to deplete deuterium in our own bodies. We are essentially deuterium depletion factories. We have an intrinsic ability, and this is something I've been learning from you today. I didn't know this before we came down. So we deplete deuterium in our bodies. That is something that our bodies are always doing, is managing the level of deuterium in our bodies. So we can get broken in terms of our ability to do that. And then we can also, so we can take in too much, and we sometimes don't get rid of it as much as we should.
That's it.
Let's talk about how we take it in, and then we'll talk about how we deplete it. Because I think this is an interesting point to highlight and maybe reminiscent of ketogenic and carnivore diets. So in terms of water, I think most people, one of the things that I thought was very interesting was that there is this idea of deuterium depleted water, and we'll talk about that at the end. But it sounds like, what are the biggest way or the easiest ways that we can control the amount of deuterium coming into our bodies? How can we minimize that?
Food is very important. And going back to the Krebs cycle, we all learned that the main purpose of the Krebs cycle was to make ATP. But I actually consider it a hydrogen recycling plant, in that we are designed in such an amazing way that we have many protective mechanisms in place for all sorts of things, blood pressure, everything. But every time our deuterium comes along, our body in that cycle is actually replacing them with a regular hydrogen. And that's a natural mechanism that's put into place. We also do want to be aware of how it is getting into our body in the first place. And one of the most important ways is to understand food, and to understand that from, let's say, a pound of fat, we actually convert in our bodies, we convert that into water. And a pound of fat can be converted into 2 cups of water.
When we burn a pound of fat on our body, not if we eat 2 pounds of fat, right? Okay. So this is an interesting thing for people to know, and we can talk about that more later, that when we're in ketosis or if we're fasting, and if we burn a pound of fat on our bodies, we can convert that into, you said 2 cups of water or a liter of, I've heard a liter of something in there. Yes. We can make water out of fat. Okay. But
I changed the liters to cups per American.
Okay.
And compared to the same amount of carbohydrates, we'll only convert to 1 cup. So you yield a half as much of this metabolic water in the mitochondria,
right?
So we do have a lot of control that way by understanding that and helping us to make choices in which foods.
Which foods are the highest in deuterium?
Well, we do know, we can go into the whole fruit story, but we do understand that in green plants, they have the chloroplast, which is essentially their mitochondria, and they are also trying to protect it from deuterium by pushing that away into the sad for everybody to learn, but important for everybody to learn, the fruit, and also into the seeds.
This is something we talked about before. So can deuterium break the chloroplast in plants as well? They're trying to push it out?
So yes, but the advantage that plants have is they're in the sun, and the sun actually helps deplete deuterium on its own. So if as people, one of the reasons probably our ancestors were healthier because they were always also out in the sun. So yes.
How does the sun, let's just go down that rabbit hole for a moment. How does the sun deplete deuterium? Because this kind of wraps back around to the idea of like red and near infrared and light.
Yeah. We can talk about it at the plant. It's at the plant level itself. It seems that sunlight is able to help something in the plant bind deuterium and move it out.
Okay.
That doesn't happen in people.
Okay, it's a little different in humans.
Right. In humans, what light does more than anything else, it really helps to change the viscosity of, among other things. And not only does light do this, but the right sounds, all these things change the viscosity of the metabolic or the water inside of our mitochondria. Now, when you think about this, water, it's not the same kind of water that you think about drinking. Inside the mitochondria, it's like metal. It's very, very thick. It's a metal. It's not water. This
This goes back to the different phases of water. There's this, no?
Well, yeah. Let's not use phases.
Okay.
Reason I say that because...
But it looks different than what we're drinking.
It's completely different.
It's a different structure.
Yes, because as it becomes inside your cells, for instance, gravity doesn't matter. It's about electromotive forces. So gravity doesn't have anything to do with inside you. It has to do with outside your mitochondria, outside the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So indeed, people have coined it the fourth phase or the new phase.
Right.
But that's old science and somebody putting a new term on something that every scientist in the world already knew. So it is very thick, and the thickness of that is determined by the ratio of deuterium to protium.
Mm-hmm. So this is deuterium versus Sean Baker to Paul.
Yes. The more Sean Bakers,
deuterium,
you imagine, the more viscous it is.
Right.
Now, when you hit it with sunlight or near infrared and red light, it makes it less viscous because think about it as just vibration. All these things are the same. We just think of them as different, but you eat light. You eat sound. It's the same thing. So this comes into you, and it changes the viscosity because it takes that energy, that vibrational energy, and really changes the viscosity of that water. The less, and it's more effective, the lower the deuterium level is. If there's less Sean's, it's a lot more effective.
Because they all move via a frequency, and if that frequency is bumping into deuterium all the time,
it can't keep train.
It's refracting that frequency.
So light affects the viscosity of the molecular water in our mitochondria. And by making the molecular water less viscous, it can improve the flow of the hydrogens through the nanomotors and improve the function of the nanomotors.
Yeah, think about if your car's tuned up, you run better.
Yeah, and this is some of the part of the hypothesis around how near infrared and red light might be affecting increased ATP production. I'll do a whole separate podcast with the Juve guys, and they can speak to that in detail. But from what I've learned from looking at their research is that there's a lot of research that red and near infrared light will improve ATP production in the mitochondria. So this really marries the two things, and the potential mechanism here is that it's changing the viscosity of the water and improving the efficiency of the nanomotors.
Yeah,
we love the combination.
Yeah, we published a paper on it, and that's one of our things that we've got. It's definite, and again, it's science. It's not supposition. Mm-hmm. And sound does this. The right sounds do the same thing. So when you go to a sound bath, it does the same thing.
Interesting. So let's go back to plants. So plants are trying to get rid of deuterium too, and where do they put deuterium?
Yeah, again, most of the time it's going to it's going to put that deuterium in the seeds and in the fruit. Most of the time, that's where it's going to go.
So the seeds and the fruit of plants are going to have the highest levels of deuterium. So if we wanted to just do one simple thing to get lower deuterium in our diet, we would not eat seeds, which would be seeds, grains, legumes, and nuts, right? These are all plant seeds.
So yeah, I always love getting in that. There are some nut. Again, think of it this way: if you're going to eat a nut with a lot of fat in it,
like a macadamia nut,
a walnut, a pecan. Mm-hmm. Those have a lot of fat. Therefore, they have a lot. It's the plant puts the deuterium in the carbohydrates of their the carbohydrates, not the fat.
Not on the fat.
Is free.
Fat is free from the deuterium in plants, and the fruit. the fruit is going to have lots of the carbohydrates. So like a strawberry or a peach, higher levels of deuterium.
Yes.
And that's been measured.
That's been measured. Avocados, they're great. They're fruit, but they're also high fat.
High fat fruit.
Yeah.
High fat fruit.
Yeah,
so, okay. Interesting.
And it's really, really cool. Again, and people who are fruitarians, and I get it, but this is something that's it's relatively new within people. This is not something we did 50, 60 years ago. We didn't eat 5 fruits a day. That's not the way it works.
So what about deuterium levels in something like a tuber, like a sweet potato, which is high carbohydrate?
Yeah, it's still high.
Higher.
Yeah. Again, especially all of our ancestral tubers look completely different from the tubers.
I've talked about that before, yes.
Those things that we eat now are not real. I mean, it's probably okay if you could go and find them someplace, and they're really small. If you've ever seen a piece of broccoli or sweet potato from Africa that is ancestral, you won't eat it.
It doesn't even exist. I mean, broccoli's from the ancestral mustard plant, right? Do you guys have a published list of like deuterium content in foods?
So we have the largest list of deuterium in food now, but what we're doing is going through to make sure it's right. What we found during this is, I think, phenomenal, is there's no such thing as being 100% correct, because the farming practices where you've done it changes everything. So we can't say broccoli is better. Yeah, location. We can't say broccoli is better because there's some broccoli that's great, some broccoli that's not.
What makes it less good?
It's their farming practice, depending on if they use, if what kind of pesticides they use, if they watered it with rainwater or mountain water, just where it's grown. So we can see as much as a 20 ppm difference between, for instance, red peppers that are grown in Hungary and red peppers that are grown in the crater. So it's just amazing. We've learned so much. So when we talk about therapeutic foods, we make sure that we go for the one that's the lowest, and we measure all of these things.
And you mentioned ppm, that's parts per million. So when we're looking at deuterium in the human body, the numbers I've seen you guys quote is that, humans are somewhere between 120 and 150 ppm, or correct me there. Like what ranges do you see in humans in terms of deuterium parts per million?
So within this environment, the way people have been eating now, we see it anywhere from the absolute big time athletes who are in the 90s and hundreds. That's like elite. They're very good at depleting deuterium. They're very good at depleting deuterium, and their diets are very good. So it's not only are they not being, they expose themselves less to deuterium, but they do everything else right because they're athletes. And they have more mitochondria. I guess that's a very good thing to talk about. Why bodybuilders are in better shape. Thank you, Sean. But they're in better shape than other people because they have an excess of mitochondria that can be used up. Now, unfortunately, those who use the other things that go with it, drugs that
Mexican supplements.
Yeah, that's the wrong place to do. So, and we see with people with dysfunction as high as 155, 160, even above. But we know those people are very sick. So there's a range to 90 to 160 in terms of deuterium levels in the human body. And you were saying that across foods, you can see a 20 parts per million difference just based on where they're grown. Yeah, and that's including in what they've eaten. That includes animals. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what would you, if you were going to construct a low deuterium diet, what would you say would be in that diet? So we do it every day. So when we look at low deuterium diet would be... honestly, carnivore diet's crazy. Don't talk about the carnivore. Yeah, carnivore diets most of us are carnivore. So a carnivore diet is a low deuterium diet. If you buy the right animal. And what's the right animal? Okay, the right animal, again, is a animal that is grass-fed, that is not the youngest animal nor the oldest animal, that really has not used river water, but that has waters from a mountain stream and that type of thing. One of our favorite, one of the first peoples that we actually measured was the farming of Bel Campo meats.
Here in Los Angeles.
Friggin' amazing.
Near Mount Shasta, so they have really good water supply and they have incredible farming practices.
So Belcampo should be sponsoring this podcast now.
Yeah, you should actually.
I should talk to them.
Yeah, they're.
Maybe I'll get a promo code.
It is.
So you measured the Belcampo meat,
compared to.
and they had lower levels of deuterium.
Yeah, we were going to spend $200,000 to build our own ranch to make food.
You were.
They already did it.
And you just get the meat from Belcampo.
It's more expensive, but it's worth it.
And so the Belcampo meat is good because it's grass-fed, and the water that the cows are drinking is from a certain source.
Yes, and even they're not stressed.
They're happy.
They're really actually are happy animals, and it does make a difference.
So, okay, interesting. Have you guys measured any other meat purveyors?
Yes. We've measured a meat from a lot of other places too. There are some that are good, some that are bad. I won't use any names because we have to run them again.
I'm going to get that secret from you offline.
But I will say, at the same time, we will tell anyone that it's not about the purveyor. It's about what your body can deplete.
And we'll get to that next.
It's not a money thing. So anybody can afford to do this.
Exactly. And I just wanted to talk about the different sources and stuff. And I think that's a really important thing that I was coming away with before we started recording, was that it's not so, I mean, the food is important, and we know that a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet can benefit a lot of people. A well-constructed paleo diet can benefit a lot of people. Perhaps a diet that's low in seeds and fruit can benefit a lot of people, but people may not be able to get the super special raised in the mountains Himalayan yak that has the lowest deuterium in the world. But as we'll talk about in a moment, we can enable our body to do its own depletion as good as possible. And that's really where the money is, right?
Yes. And as a matter of, to go even further, while I'm a carnivore, we have vegetarians and keto vegans that can do this just as well as we can. Mm-hmm. So it's really, your body does not care if you're a vegan or vegetarian or carnivore or keto. All it cares about is the hydrogens that you're putting in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so it would be interesting to see, what the keto vegetarian or the vegan, like what kind of hydrogens they were putting in. Just to kind of piggyback on the conversation, are they eating a lot of fruit?
No. Okay,
so they're like a low fruit vegan.
Yes, they all understand that. It's they are judicious about. They have to be even better at this than we are.
So they're constructing a vegan or vegetarian or keto vegetarian diet in a certain way around a low deuterium sources. And
increasing much more oil in their diet.
Like a higher fat.
Yes.
Okay. The oil as being lower deuterium.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's move on then for people and talk about how we can become elite deuterium depleting machines in our lives, because that's really, it sounds like, where we should focus. That's where the money is, because I don't want people to come away from this podcast thinking they need to buy deuterium depleted water. We will talk at the end about your work with these cancer patients and the utility of deuterium depleted water and some of these impressive trials, but I don't want people to come away thinking they need to buy expensive deuterium depleted water or seek out this magical yak in the mountains of Tibet to get this deuterium depleting. How do we become the best deuterium depleting machines that we can be as humans? Because that's what I think people want to know about.
What I really love about what we're doing is we're getting back to nature and really trying to get everybody back to nature, because the whole world is pretty far removed from it. We're all working indoors and not working outdoors. Many factors there. We use air, food, water, sunshine or light therapies, appropriate movement, and we'll always touch on, state of mind. And we want to make sure that people have support from their family and friends in adopting this lifestyle. So the air part consists of a breathing module that we provide and teach all of our patients, because we want to help them increase their oxygen content. Many benefits of that, but including contributing to the water production. The food part, we teach them all about.
Tell me more about the breathing. How do they breathe? How do people breathe? How should they do it?
We teach them in a way, well, I'll simply explain it, especially while they're on the deuterium depleted water. We provide them with a mask that they can wear when they sleep, if they can, or throughout the day, which means the air that they're exhaling will have less deuterium in it than the air in their house. Number one, they're taking in less. They will also rebreathe a little bit of their own carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide will trigger their hemoglobin to release oxygen to their tissues. That extra oxygen has what's called a higher affinity and avidity for deuterium, which means it will grab a hold of it and it won't let it go until it's excreted. So, we teach people how they can do these breathing techniques easily and wear the mask to accelerate the benefits of that. And
what are the breathing techniques?
Yeah, it's pretty much the Buteyko breathing method.
Buteyko? Buteyko?
Buteyko.
Okay.
Yes. It's actually very common. A lot of, particularly in Australia, it's very well known amongst medical doctors because there's a high incidence of asthma in Australia, and it really helps to reduce the amount of medication and panic that they go through. It's also very calming. So doing it even before bed really helps to relax people to improve that REM sleep, etc. And the way that we really help people to see the benefits of this is we teach them what's called the control pause, which we teach them how they can measure how long they can hold their breath comfortably, and they keep track of that. And they will see that number rise as they learn this breathing technique, which means their oxygen levels are increasing. I do know that in Russia, a lot of the doctors, when they go into a hospital, they will measure how long someone can hold their breath to determine how well or unwell they are.
Interesting.
And that's on exhale. How long you can hold your breath on exhale, not inhale. It's a big difference.
Right.
And that's
Buteyko has that. It's like an exhale, an exhalation, and a hold.
Correct.
I can look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really cool. And now we've changed ours is kind of a Buteyko method on steroids, so it works faster and better and helps you to sleep. So it's all tied together to where all these things work together. But
okay. And then you talked a little bit about the sleep. So how do we deplete deuterium while we're sleeping? How does that work, or what happens?
Well, we do know that REM sleep is a mechanism for removing deuterium, and it has a lot to do with the movement that we're going through. It starts to burn up all those carbohydrates and helps to remove the deuterium via the lymphatics, etc.
So the lymphatics are this mechanism, this network, this mesh of lymphatic system in the brain.
On the left side. Right?
Yeah, I talk about that because we really just talk about the lymphatics because we do a lot of GBM patients. However, this is true for the general body too. So in sleep, the nanomotors actually have a garbage bag on them. And so with this garbage bag, your body takes the extra deuterium and it tries to put it in this garbage bag. And at nighttime, when in deep sleep, after it's removed as much of the deuterium as it can, it empties that out. And that goes to your gut. It goes as you breathe it out. It's the reason that you weigh. If you anybody ever wonder why they weigh more when you wake up? Now I can send you a paper on how that works because it's actually removing deuterium and carbons and hydrogen from your body from that night before. And it's magically makes you weigh more. So it does that. And then, but as you get more and more deuterium load in you, those garbage bags, just like a hefty bag, split. And now all that deuterium just gets wasted out again. And it destroys those nanomotors. So sleep's a very, very important part of it. As a matter of fact, when we looked at things like sleep apnea, we discovered is really just deuterium that gets stuck in your brainstem. And what happens, your body tries to keep you from breathing because it's trying to kill you because it doesn't want any more of this deuterium. So if we can show by removing deuterium in this brainstem, sleep apnea goes away. You're able to breathe. You're able to sleep better. You're able to lose weight.
Less snoring. Many women have thanked me that they can now sleep next.
How do you remove deuterium from the brainstem in people with sleep apnea?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just a matter of the solution is dilution. It's just this is where you really, with food and water and proper exercises, all these things lead to your deuterium levels going lower, and it's just a matter of time, if there's not too much damage, that your body will return its ability to deplete deuterium.
So basically the takeaway with sleep is somebody might want to have something like an Oura ring or something to track their sleep and ensure they're getting adequate amounts of REM and deep sleep. And it's another reason to prioritize sleep because at a high level, during sleep, there's evidence that our body is actually getting rid of excess deuterium. Is that right?
Yes, and part of our program, we fit all of our patients with Fitbit watches to follow their sleep patterns and then to tell them what is wrong with their sleep, and then we fix their sleep. That's part of what we do.
How do you fix their sleep?
So it's a variety of different ways. Not only do we use pink noise to increase their deep sleep, we use different supplements, herbals, medicines to increase REM sleep.
Whatever we can do to calm down the autonomic nervous system, get people out of that sympathetic dominance into parasympathetic dominance so that they can relax and move on to.
I've noticed using my Juve light that I feel like that happens. Have you? Yeah, you guys also use the Juve, and I mean,
Yeah, we have 10 here.
yeah, you have 10 Juve lights at your.
Right. Sorry, Wes.
Yeah. All right. So I mean, people know that I'm affiliated with Juve. Whatever. I think they're great, and this is an interesting thing. And I have a friend visiting me in San Diego this weekend. He was standing in front of my Juve light this morning, and he said, "Wow, I can feel something like." When I stand in front of my Juve light, and this is not a paid advertisement for Juve, I'm just saying, and it's interesting that you guys have the same clinical experience. I can feel, it feels like my nervous system is changing. It feels more calming. And again, there's confirmation bias here, whatever, but I feel something different with the red and near infrared when I'm in front of the Juve light. So it's interesting that you guys use that clinically as well.
And what you feel is accurate because it's really essentially lowering the deuterium levels in your brain around all these things where it's going to make it work better. There's been papers that were published at Oxford on deuterium levels causing both depression and anxiety. And by lowering depression, you're able to treat depression, schizophrenia just by deuterium and anxiety.
By lowering deuterium.
By lowering the deuterium.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this goes back to another thing we were talking about. Do you guys think that the carnivore diet is working through deuterium depletion?
No doubt about it. I want to say I'm a keto person and worked on keto forever. And it was serendipity because keto is simply a deuterium depleted diet, and carnivore is fantastic because what it does, the animal does all the work for you. It takes all the nutrients and everything, and it's eating it, and you're just eating that perfect food. So I'm a great believer in carnivore.
The animal's kind of depleting the deuterium on its own, and then you're getting the lower deuterium in your diet.
Lower deuterium in your diet, and you're getting higher fat that's deuterium depleted. You're getting the conformational enzymes and everything that are working. As everybody knows, when you see a lion, which we always like to talk about, a lion, and they attack their prey and they bring down an antelope or a zebra, the first thing they eat is not the steaks, not the legs.
I'm talking about that.
It's great, and there's a reason for it.
What's the first thing they eat?
Yeah,
the fat in the organs. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all the deuterium depleted things. That's what and the last thing that they will go in, they'll eat the last part, and they leave all the other stuff for the hyenas.
Have you guys measured the deuterium in different organs or different compartments of an animal? Do we have like deuterium levels in liver versus muscle meat?
So we have done that.
You have?
Yes. Now, the interesting thing, again, I will say, so after all these measurements, when it really comes down to it, it's how much fat's in that thing. And it's the hard part. It's really about the fat.
It's about the fat. So basically what I'm hearing is that fat is generally lower in deuterium, and people should work toward maybe a higher fat ketogenic diet and a higher fat carnivore diet, things like this,
yes,
rather than a higher protein carnivore diet from a deuterium perspective, perhaps.
Well, even from the protein, I'm all for protein, but again, if you're going to eat protein from a grass-fed animal, that's cool too, because again, it's only about the deuterium. So we know that fat is great because fat's safe, because with a fat, if it's grass-fed, that fat won't be exchanged. You're going to get you get what you get, and so that's the way that works. But proteins, again, it's not as definite
in terms of the deuterium levels or how it's going to affect you.
Or how you're going to process it.
How you're going to process it. Okay. So going back to the way that you guys make people into good deuterium depleters, we talked about good sleep. We talked about Buteco breathing. In people that are cancer patients, you might use a special mask that helps the rebreathing.
Well, everybody.
Wow.
Everybody.
Breathing it
Yeah.
because it's in our atmosphere.
The Golden State Warriors are using the mask.
The Golden State Warriors.
Yes,
You probably
want to say that.
The Golden State Warriors are using your mask?
They're using the mask. Yes.
Wow.
Many athletic teams love it because they have to fly right before they have to play or perform. They don't want to get sick on that aircraft, so it has a double benefit for them.
What's the rugby team? The Black.
All Blacks in New Zealand. They're using
use it too.
The mask.
Yeah.
You'll have to show me one. Interesting. Okay. What else do you guys do to help people become good at depleting deuterium?
The other thing is that we talk about cholesterol, but when you think about cholesterol is your most important nutrient in your body. The problem with cholesterol is because your deuterium levels are high, it becomes deuterated. And once it becomes deuterated, the sun can't break it down to vitamin D or bile or any of your steroid hormones. So what we do is by lowering that deuterium level, we get now good cholesterol. Then we make sure you're in the sun to get that vitamin D, for there, and that breaks it down, and you start to see testosterone levels go up. But it's good testosterone. You start to see bile, so you can now use fat a lot better. So we look at light. We do proper exercises, and likes to talk about that. Proper exercises means that we do a lot of isometric exercises that are not, you don't have to run miles. And these things, we just get enough to where it makes your mitochondria work best, right? And we also work on stress, and we work on mind, and like to say, we work on your mind to make you, it's almost like the placebo effect. Placebo effect is real. If you believe, then you actually can make something work. And so we really work a lot on understanding that, again, especially with cancer patients, that you're living in a cancer-free world. And this is what a cancer-free world works like. That's no different from our athletes. And our athletes won 6 gold medals in the last Olympics, in the Winter Olympics. They have a mindset that puts them where they are before they start. And they don't have stress. They enjoy stress. And so we try to teach our patients, enjoy stress. If you enjoy stress, cortisol goes down, right? It's crazy. I mean, I'm talking to you. I mean, once you understand these little hacks, it makes it easy.
Reframing things is incredibly powerful, and reframing the way that we deal with stress can be incredibly powerful. And I've spoken on other podcasts before. People sometimes ask me, what's the first thing people should do? And I think that the best answer that I've given in the past has been the first step is the mindfulness and the reframing the mind and thinking about how you're gonna approach the context of everything that you're doing. So that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like to say, our first thing we do is tell our patients is to reimagine their life. That's our first stage of our protocols.
You mentioned deuterated cholesterol. This kind of segues into something else that I think will be interesting for people to hear about. So what we've been talking about so far is the consumption of foods that have hydrogen in their molecules, whether it's carbohydrates, fat, or protein, and those hydrogens getting into the mitochondria and affecting the nanomotors. But this was interesting for me to learn that these deuterium atoms can become incorporated into all the molecules in our body. And if people are familiar with chemistry, they will know that things like cholesterol, testosterone, DNA molecules, which are ribose, sugars, and nucleotides, these all have hydrogens attached. And so let's talk a little bit about the way that heavy hydrogen or deuterium can affect these molecules. So you mentioned it briefly, but I think it's worth reiterating that what you said was that if cholesterol becomes deuterated, which is not, cholesterol getting like a mohawk or a cool haircut, right? This is cholesterol getting deuterium incorporated into the cholesterol molecule. It can affect how well that cholesterol could be broken down in the human body. And so talk to me a little bit more about molecular incorporation of deuterium and how that can affect our physiology. We talked a little about DNA before we started recording.
Well, for example, the bonds between deuterium and cholesterol are 7 times stronger than regular hydrogen and cholesterol. So is it making that cholesterol that we have unusable? So we do know that, it may not be the first thing that the deuterium is depleted from, but over time, as you continue to deplete your deuterium, you can deplete your cholesterol. So it now becomes usable cholesterol. And now, using the sun to make vitamin D is a better way of getting the vitamin D, especially for people who are, going to include more fats in their diet. They'll now be able to produce their own bile salts so that they can handle and utilize these fats. And even in hormone production, many women are just rushing to hormones and
men.
Taking hormones and definitely men. And particularly testosterone, we love to use the combination of the Juve and releasing this deuterium from the cholesterol so that they can make their own hormones. So we want people to have the knowledge that they may be able to do a lot of these things by themselves before they go to outside sources. And it's always interesting to me because the world is much more aware now of processed foods and of avoiding them, but they don't really think about it when they take supplements or other things that are actually processed. They're not natural. So just want everybody to start thinking about deuterium and how it affects us. I always think that this definite an increase, a rise in autoimmunity, and the 3-dimensional structure of deuterium. Once that gets into the thyroid cell, it's not going to look the same as what it's supposed to, and could trigger an immune.
We talked about that a little before. That deuterium getting into molecules, and I love what you were saying there about cholesterol. This idea that perhaps if deuterium is incorporated into the cholesterol molecule, that cholesterol molecule may not be able to be used by the body to make 7-dehydrocholesterol, which is the precursor for vitamin D. And then, as people may know, cholesterol is the ultimate precursor for all of our steroid hormones, whether this is estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisol, many of the steroid hormones, they come from cholesterol. So the hypothesis would be that if deuterium gets incorporated, if these molecules become deuterated, cholesterol may not be able to be used in those hormonal pathways as well. And like you're saying, if other molecules or other proteins in our bodies become deuterated, it could change the structure of those molecules and could potentially trigger autoimmunity. Like you're saying with thyroid, if thyroxine or thyroglobulin, in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the antibodies are TPO, which is thyroid peroxidase, and thyroglobulin. So it sounds like, if I understand this properly, if deuterium were to get incorporated into thyroglobulin or thyroid peroxidase, it could change the structure of the molecule, make it look foreign, and perhaps that could be why the body's mounting an immune response. Is that right?
That's correct. And that's the same thing with arthritis and those kind of things, because again, the reason it happens when you get older is because you can't deplete deuterium as well. Therefore, your immune system sees something different. And it is really different. It's three-dimensionally different. Same things we look at diabetes, insulin receptor, and insulin that we make. It's not that what we start looking at, we found out that even the insulin starts to have deuterium in it, and it's not functional anymore, right? And the receptors are not functional anymore. All these things
because the insulin looks different, and doesn't.
It's a lock and key. It doesn't.
Do you think this is the mechanism of insulin resistance?
Yes,
then
we studied this. So all these, and even so, we looked at insulin. We looked at that, and there was what was the other big one that we mentioned? Oh, and of course DNA. What I love, and one of the biological functions, people have to understand that deuterium is necessary. It is part of who we are. It's part of Earth. It's here for a reason. And it helps things to grow fast. Bacteria, viruses, babies, teenagers. We need it at certain times, and our body and the hormones that we have are all fixed together. Like I said, as a symphony to actually do this. And so it actually makes all these things work together. But yes, indeed, as you get older, you get more deuterium. That's when you start to see this cacophony of everything being screwed up. Because
why don't we deplete, before we move on from that, why don't we deplete deuterium as well as we get older? When we get older?
Because the nasty thing about deuterium is the more you accumulate over time, that's why you want to try to eat younger animals even rather than older animals, the more time you have to accumulate deuterium. As you accumulate deuterium, you start to lose cellular energy. You start to lose your own natural mechanisms for removing it. It starts this nasty downward cycle.
So it's really a dog chasing its tail, or it's maybe not. That's not the best metaphor, but it's something that feeds. It's a feed forward loop. When you have more deuterium, you can't produce as much ATP, and then when you don't have as much ATP, you can't clear deuterium.
Right.
So you need to break the vicious cycle.
And that's what we love, what we can do, because we can turn that around into a positive uphill cycle.
And so somebody that's in a vicious cycle of not enough ATP, not enough deuterium depletion, can break that by doing the things we talked about earlier, right?
Yes. Well, I just wanted to mention before, because we were talking about autoimmunity, and it is known that when someone has an autoimmune disease, they have a preponderance for more. But I want people to think about that, because it really is, I want them to think about the terrain, because especially for cancer, a lot of people have, gone through cancer and they're good to go, or they've had surgery and I'm good now. I'm good. They had a welcome environment for tumors or autoimmunity to grow in. So it's not about just cutting stuff out. I'm good now. You haven't addressed the terrain or the welcome environment that's allowing this to happen in the first place.
Exactly.
So that's what we want to do. We want to cut that cycle and be able to switch it around and put the power to the people back in the people's hands. Once they know this, that they actually have a lot of control over which direction they're going to go.
Well, I think that's a pattern that I see in Western medicine over and over, is that, and this is my little soapbox, I'll get off it quickly so I don't slip off it, but because soapboxes are slippery. That when we just address the symptoms, we're not addressing the terrain that allowed the imbalance to happen in the first place. And I think this is where Western medicine goes wrong and does a great disservice to many patients, is that by ameliorating symptoms with medications, we are not addressing the fundamental imbalance that allowed these illnesses to arise in the first place, and more things will happen in the future. So I totally agree with what you said, and I think we need to address that at like the fundamental level.
Yeah, I get people to imagine their plumbing, if they're, the kitchen plumbing. I mean, we don't want to live in that environment. You want to make it something that's a clean, healthy environment to thrive in rather than to suffocate in.
So tell me a little bit about when we need deuterium, because we've touched upon this a couple times, and I want people to understand what I was educated about before we started this conversation, the fact that at certain times in our lives, deuterium is necessary, and it may affect the way that our DNA is available for transcription.
I think let's put it, when you're growing, you need deuterium. Absolutely. If you find people that are shorter and different diseases or dysfunctions, the mitochondria functions, because again, that actually is because they don't have enough deuterium sometimes.
Ice cream.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. So deuterium is important for growth because it keeps the S cycle going. It also allows you to so it speeds up the rate of proliferation.
The S cycle being one of the cycles of sort of mitosis, right? So mitosis has a variety of cycles. People can look this up. But the S cycle
makes it shorter.
Right.
Yeah,
okay. It's one of the cycles of cell division.
Yeah, and it's what's important. It's what's so neat is it doesn't do it in a vacuum. The body actually, it's all coordinated. The right hormones are on, all the right things are on for this to happen. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing a discoordination of the deuterium levels in younger people to where now it's not about growth. You're seeing a lot more kids with type 2 diabetes. You're seeing kids with cancer, tremendous rates. It's GBMs, CLLs, all of these kind of cancers and diseases of old people because they're being challenged too much with deuterium.
So they have too much deuterium.
Yeah. And they're not being able to deplete it. They don't sleep as well.
They're not able to maintain the deuterium balance as well.
The mother does.
Yeah,
the mother does.
The mother has higher levels of deuterium.
And that's why it's very important to test. Yes, we test foods and we test water and all of these things, but we test human beings. And that's what's really important for people to know, that you have this tool where you can find out where you're at and then you can manage yourself along the way. And that's also how we write individualized programs for people so that we can, adjust it along the way if we need to. Once people are doing great, after they've done with their program, they have different options. But a lot of people just get tested at least once a year just to see where they're at, to see what sort of adjustments they need to make.
Yeah, I do, because I think that's one thing I want to pick up, and that is what the testing is about. We actually patented and invented these tests that a lot of, and the idea is to show you the difference between what's in your body and what you can deplete. That's the important place. How much you can. It's not important. There are other people that are trying to copy us that don't understand the science, and they're measuring only what's in your saliva, what's coming out of you. That doesn't make any difference. It's a waste of money and it's a waste of time and it's screwing up the science. What you have got to know is how much you can deplete. If you don't buy an assay that just looks at how much you have in your, simply eat better. If that's all you're worried about, friggin' stop eating apples. Don't waste $50 or $60 on a test that says nothing. And so so now I'll get off my soapbox.
You're not so careful. Careful. Soapboxes are slippery, Kyo.
That's right.
They're slippery soapboxes.
So
we have had some people calling us afraid because they've only just done that one test, and I've said it doesn't mean anything. You have nothing to compare that.
So you have to measure how much is in your body and how much you're excreting.
Yeah.
That's the important part, because I truly believe the best measure of health, and this is what's so neat. If you want to know how healthy you are, find out how much you're able to deplete, because if you're able to deplete more and can even deplete more and more, you're going to be healthier, period.
So do you measure blood and saliva or blood and urine, or how do you make that measurement?
So we started out measuring a lot of different things, but right now the easiest thing we do is to measure the deuterium in your breath, which is a marker, which is a marker for what's in your heart and lung. and hearts and lungs. It doesn't measure everything. And then we measure the deuterium that's in your saliva, which is a marker for what's in your blood. Now, it's different places in different places of the body. Make sure you understand that. And we've invented an MRI that can actually look at deuterium levels all over your body and give you a cloud to tell you exactly how much deuterium, or not, shouldn't say exactly, we haven't finished those algorithms, but can tell you you can actually see a picture of it. And cholesterol levels. So, yeah, so we've done that too.
What do you measure with cholesterol levels?
We can actually also look at cholesterol and tell you how much deuterium is in your cholesterol, how much deuterium is in your thyroid. We can measure it down. We are a serious lab.
Is this with nuclear magnetic resonance?
No, we have a lot of different ways.
You got tricks.
Yeah, we got
sorcery. Okay. We'll save that for another podcast.
What's great also is in most tests is the follow-up test is the most important test, because that's how we can really adjust people's program along the way, see how well or unwell, how they're responding, and make sure that everybody's treated as an individual, because everybody's had various decades or years of deuterium overload, and everybody's in a different place.
So you mean test at baseline, do an intervention, then retest?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yep, functional medicine. I just want to circle back a little bit so that people understand the chromatin and the DNA. Let's talk about that. And I'm sorry that I keep circling back, but I'm trying to keep us on track. I want to get to this. It's more me. I'm selfish. I want to hear about this stuff. Because we were talking about this before, this idea that when there's more deuterium in your DNA, the DNA is more open and it's more able to be transcribed. And this I want to tie it together with the childhood stuff. So is this really what's going on in our childhood and growth phases, that our DNA is more open, our DNA is more able to be transcribed, it's more active? People may know from previous podcasts I've done with Dom D'Agostino that DNA kind of opens and condenses. DNA has to get open to be transcribed, and then it's closed up when it's quiescent or quiet. So what's going on with DNA and its structure with deuterium?
Yeah, Dom and I have had this discussion many times.
Oh, really?
We're good. We're good. Matter of fact, his wife was on this couch 3 months ago, sitting here before she did her last thing. So before she went to play like she was going to be on Mars. So, but yes. So what happens is, and it's pretty well documented, we know that during different phases in children that we saw this opening of DNA. What they didn't know is why, but what we're able to show now via Gabor Chamolier, and we're able to show how this worked in vitro, to show how the cells open and close because of this, and we can then make that same, since it's biology, make that same jump to how it works in mammalian cells.
How the DNA opens and closes?
Yeah, but when we could do it in a dose-dependent... Now, this is an interesting thing. You could change the media in a dose-dependent way and keep those and make the multiplication of these and change the cell, the rate at which these cells divide, and dose-dependently.
What about telomeres?
Yeah, telomeres, which is my favorite. Again, telomeres, they say, is an indicator of age and how long you're going to live. The truth is that telomeres, what you're really seeing in this case is, as you get deuterium inside your DNA, inside your chromatin, it really causes it to bunch up. And so it makes the telomeres look shorter, right? So we've had patients that have gone to deuterium depletion, and a year later, their deuterium levels are lower and their telomeres are longer, because it's simply, and it makes sense, because as we get older, we said you don't deplete deuterium as well, and therefore your telomeres look short.
And this is so interesting, and I've talked about this in the past, but I'll remind people that there's at least one article to show that red meat lengthens telomeres.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe this is the mechanism, And I talked about this on the podcast with Dave Asprey. I don't think it's been released yet, but red meat will lengthen telomeres in that study. And this was news to me before we started talking on this podcast, that the lengthening and shortening of telomeres may not actually be due to the number of base pairs or actual chromatin in the telomere, but the bunching. You called it tunneling. Yes. This idea that deuterium can gather other hydrogen atoms to it, and sort of like a molecular magnetism. It's not proper physics to say that, but it's an attractive force, and it can cause a telomere to bunch. So perhaps, would that then suggest that perhaps short telomeres are a proxy for higher levels of deuterium in the chromatin?
Yes, I say that because as they say, it's a proxy for age. It's not. It's a proxy really for the amount, your inability to deplete deuterium.
So if people really wanted to get longer telomeres, which is probably a good thing, they should think about deuterium levels in their bodies, how to deplete them, et cetera, and then retest. That would be a fascinating experiment.
Yeah. Again, we've done a couple of patients already. So.
What I love is being able to share this, and having you being able to share this now is that we can really understand why a lot of mechanisms or a lot of things that we have been doing that we know are good for us. Now we know why. Now we know why green plants are good for us. Now we know why the telomeres.
Green plants are good for us?
Well, maybe not for the carnivores, but I like some
good for the animals.
Good for the animals that eat them too. And me, I like green plants still. And also why sugar. Everybody knows sugar's bad for you, particularly cancer patients. We know that sugar is full of deuterium, and that's the explanation, among many other explanations.
So interesting. Well, this is a natural segue to cancer because I heard a podcast recently. Peter Attia interviewed an oncologist, and I am not a cancer specialist by any stretch of the imagination. But what I took out of that podcast was that in terms of genomics with cancer, and recently I interviewed Dom DiAgostino, and I want to get Tom Seyfried on my podcast, but in that podcast, that oncologist was talking about in terms of cancer genomics, meaning in terms of what we learned in the last few decades regarding cancer, the biggest discoveries have been that in cancers, there are large changes in the epigenetics of the cancer, meaning the way that the cancer genes are turned on and off. That we know that in cancer, there are mutations at the actual DNA level. And my impression is that there's the big debate now, or that one of the debates is that whether those mutations in the DNA at a cellular or nuclear level occur de novo, or whether they're caused because of mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's a conversation for Tom Seyfried, and maybe another conversation with Dom, or we can talk about it as well. Whether mitochondrial dysfunction is the first problem with cancers, or whether there are de novo mutations in the nucleus. But it was interesting for me to hear that there are a lot of epigenetic changes in cancer. That would be changes in the way that genes are turned on and off in cancer that are perhaps some of the most profound. And this harkens back to the idea of deuterium, because if deuterium levels in our genes can affect epigenetics, and you were sort of correcting me about the terminology epigenetics, but let's talk about that a little bit. How is deuterium involved in cancer? Could epigenetics be going on here? Is there a connection? What's going on here?
Yeah, Peter Attia actually worked with me when I owned the Epigenetics Foundation with Quest, and we had this conversation quite a bit, so I'm glad that he's followed up on it. But yes, so when we look at epigenetics, there's two things I want to say. Cancer is a metabolic disorder. Tom Seyfried, who you mentioned, has actually become very famous about it, and Laszlo Boros, who's our chief scientist, is the first person that published that and gave a pathway for that back in the early 2000s, about 4 or 5 years before Tom wrote his book. But he's a great guy. So when we look at epigenetics and the ability of the other thing I want to say is that what we can show is that by having these high deuterium levels right here, it starts to change all those genes they're talking about beforehand. So if I can turn on c-Myc and KRAS and all these things that I studied for millennia of thinking they were important and understanding it's not them. You can't, for instance, if I put KRAS or c-Myc and I increase those genes, I have no effect on the deuterium levels. But
right.
If I change the deuterium levels, I can affect them and I can make mutations happen.
And c-Myc and RAS, these are oncogenes in some ways. These are signaling molecules in cancer cells that are turned on, that sort of signal, go divide like crazy.
Yes, and that's what we always thought. But what we now understand is that it's saying go divide by crazy because there's deuterium here and you have no choice.
That's kind of paradigm shifting.
Yeah, that's the neat thing. So we can turn these things off and on by the level of the deuterium in your body, period. And we can do it predictively.
It's a good thing I'm sitting on a couch because I'd probably fall off my chair right now.
Yeah, but I mean, Dom, we're having these discussions, and it is a paradigm shift of what we're doing, because our belief, I truly believe this, having lost the loves of my life to cancer, and that is that by using deuterium depletion, we want it to be so self-evident that any oncologist that doesn't consider this as part of regular medicine is suspect. because it's no side effects. There's nothing wrong with it.
There's not a lot of downside to it, which is what I believe about lifestyle, right?
Yes.
You know, that's one of the things that's so interesting for me is that showing people that a carnivore diet is, number one, safe and that it's sustainable. And then if we're talking about dietary interventions, why would we not do it?
That's right.
And we can give Western medicine its credit where it's due and say, do the conventional therapies for XYZ and do these other therapies as adjuncts. I think that in the case of cancer, especially, it's important to do the regular therapies or consider how the therapies might be adjunctive or supported by the adjunctive therapies. But there are lots of therapies in Western medicine that are frankly dangerous to people, and the conversation gets to be a little different about whether the risk benefit's a little more complex. But I think this is a great way to kind of bring the conversation full circle. In some of the material you sent me, there were some pretty impressive studies with prostate cancer. Can we just talk about the prostate cancer study with deuterium depleted water and the deuterium stuff and give people a sense of like how you guys have been involved in trials in certain cancers? Because these are pretty impressive.
Yeah, so we've had clinical trials in prostate cancer, breast cancer, and then we are doing prospective studies with GBM and other cancers.
Glioblastoma multiforme is GBM. It's a grade 4 astrocytoma, so it's a cancer in the brain. It's very advanced. So
yeah, that you're talking about 13 months of life.
Yes, invariably fatal with a very poor prognosis, right?
Yeah. So, but what we were able to do we were able to just use deuterium depleted water the first time, deuterium depleted water, and just by drinking deuterium depleted water and doing standard of care, these patients had better outcomes. They had less, when they went into remissions, they had less recurrence, and they lived for 7, 8, 9 years longer. In fact, we had so many of that we couldn't go out any further. We followed them for 9 years, and they're still alive.
This was the prostate cancer trial. And I believe this had 44 patients.
Yes.
So it was a 44 patient. It was a prospective trial. It was randomized. It was blinded. One group got standard of care, and one group got standard of care plus deuterium depleted water.
Yes.
And you said that, and I saw the statistics. I mean, there were statistically significant p-values less than 0.05. There were statistically significant differences in terms of, what were the endpoints? Mortality.
Yeah, mortality, actually quality of life, even comorbidities, all those things. But in each...
No ED.
We have ED.
Apart from that trial, we have a lot of patients.
Erectile dysfunction.
We put it on hold because they were fearful of erectile dysfunction. And they are now traveling the world, getting married, having a great life due to deuterium depletion.
And so in that trial, it was so impressive with the deuterium depletion, it was just the water.
Yeah.
There was nothing else that we talked about. They didn't change the diet. They didn't put them on carnivore diets, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because what's so awesome about where we are now is that 5 and 6 years later, we can do it even better.
Right, we could do it. Yeah, we could do it.
Yeah, it's bulletproof now. We're getting to that point. It's bulletproof. When you get up, how much light, what you're eating, how you're breathing, how you're sleeping. The portal that we're able, again, so you can see all these things. And actually even looking at fasting, how these things play a part of it, to where, I don't want to say it's for sure, but man, it's getting close. And
so that was an impressive trial. I don't understand why this wouldn't be standard of care for prostate cancer patients. And I mean, in medicine, we only make a standard of care when there's been a trial. And was there a similar trial with breast cancer patients?
Yes, we did the same with 230-something breast cancer patients.
And the outcomes were similar?
The outcomes were similar. It just was no comparison. And again, the prostate cancer was so interesting because we had to stop it quickly because the patients quickly found out. They could tell, oh my gosh, you're doing so much better, and they were able to figure it out. With the breast cancer too, they did the patients that did, and we found it with our practice, the patients that do deuterium depletion actually live much longer, go into remission, and they're still in remission. Now, the ones that we don't do as well with is because it's just too much damage to begin with. And we can stop the cancer, but we can't stop the damage. Another thing that you said, which I want to just add to this, we find standard of care, and probably with other medications too. When I made, for instance, chemotherapeutic drugs, we made those chemotherapeutic drugs to be used in the amounts that are greatly different than they're used in the clinic. Every science will tell you that so in our clinic now, we use 1/10 to 1/20th of the fraction of chemo and get better results. So by using this combination of deuterium depletion and chemo, now you can use Western medicine and make it safe.
So you can use lower doses of chemotherapy in combination with deuterium depletion and get an adjunctive effect, get a better effect.
Because it opens up the histone.
Yeah, because remember, it's opening everything up and it's being able to do the things it's supposed to do,
Now,
and then slowing it down. So the whole idea is just combination of everything. So you're slowing down the cancer cell, and it's the only reason you need something there is the ones that are open.
the DNA that's open.
And that's the one that you kill. The others are going to go through apoptosis, and the immune system's going to take out.
Right. So what you're saying here, just so people understand, is that the cancer cells are likely to have higher levels of deuterium or to be more susceptible to higher levels of deuterium. And they have these epigenetic modifications which result in more open chromatin. I'm speaking in broad generalizations here, but we have more open chromatin in these cancer cells. That's going to make them usually divide faster and be more susceptible to chemotherapy. You can use lower doses of chemotherapy for that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we do it every day.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay. So if people want to find you guys, like I'm sure people are just saying like, I want to get my deuterium levels checked. How do people do this? You guys are based here in Los Angeles, right? So you see people in person here in Los Angeles?
So we most of our patients, since they're from all over the world now, we really do virtually. We do have a clinic here that if they want to see an oncologist or be treated for we treat the metabolism, not the disease, right? We make it easier for your doctors to be better at what they do.
So you work with people's doctors?
Yes, definitely. If that's what they want.
Right.
Right. But we can make them healthy patients.
Right.
So they can go to the site, Double D Centers, ddcenters.com. They can order a kit. It'll be
for deuterium depletion?
Deuterium depletion to see the levels.
That's the D-Terminator test?
Yes, the D-Terminator test. Not to confuse with the new movie that's coming out, just to let everybody know. So it's a determinated test. They can get their levels tested, and then from there, we can talk about different protocols. But I will tell you, in most cases, we know where they're going to start, and we know that every cancer patient, every diabetes, their levels are high. So you don't have to wait to get a determination.
If you have a metabolic disease, you know your deuterium levels are high. You might as well just
do it. And what we do is we use the test to show that you're getting better.
Right.
And we relate that to the markers
right.
of what your disease is.
But I think it's interesting for people like me who feel pretty good, but I want to think like, I'm just curious. Like I want to triangulate my levels and be like, well, I check my lipids, I check my HSCRP, I check my fasting insulin. I want to check my deuterium and be like, well, is my level real high? Am I getting exposed somewhere I'm not thinking about? Or maybe my sleep isn't good. Give you an indication for me. Like I know you've worked with other people and, people who are young and healthy, but they have high levels of deuterium. You could change something. So I think it's very valuable. Just my opinion for people who are looking to optimize. But if people are sick, they know they're high.
No, I honestly think that the Determinator test is the most important test you can do because the deuterium levels determine all those other blood markers.
I should start doing it on my clients. Because I have private clients, right? And I'm going to have to talk to you guys and be like, you guys need to get a deuterium test. I've never done one on my clients, but I think I'm going to start. I'm definitely going to do my levels after this conversation.
Today. That's right.
All right. We're going to do it today.
Yeah. So we keep all those markers. What we're able to do is show your relationship between your deuterium levels and what those markers look like and what your disease looks like. So we don't treat the symptoms, but we just give you the ability to see the symptoms disappear.
And I love what you're saying about helping make patients healthier so they can do the mainstream therapies and make it all happen. Now, I just want to touch on one more thing so we don't forget it, and then we'll wrap up here. You guys mentioned supplements, and I'd heard this from someone else. So is it true that a lot of supplements can have variable levels of deuterium in them too? Because this is kind of the black box, right? This is something nobody thinks about. We're talking about food. We talked about water. We didn't talk about supplements.
Yeah, so it's a sore subject for some people, but yes. If we go for supplements, I'm a great more believer in natural herbs than I am in synthetic supplements because synthetic supplements are made with tap water or high levels of deuterium. And so all you're doing, especially when you take a lot of them, is you're putting incredible amounts of deuterium back into your body with things that bind to receptors with the deuterium to destroy that localized nanomotor. So while you think you're giving a supplement for the liver, you're actually hurting the liver ultimately, even though the supplement on paper should do the right thing.
In most of my clients, I see large supplement lists and I just say no, and I cut the whole thing out, and I think invariably people feel better without their supplements. And I think that supplements can be helpful for people in unique situations, but I think that they're widely overprescribed. And when I heard that, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Wes from Juve, and he was saying, yeah, there are people in the community who have had high deuterium levels, and they think it's just because they had a lot of supplements in their diet. They were young and otherwise healthy. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, what if the supplements... And I know I'm going to interview Sophia Clemens soon from Paleo Medicina. And one of the brilliant parts of their protocol is that they take people off most of their supplements or all their supplements. And I think that this is counterintuitive, but why not start there?
Yeah, we work closely. We, of course, our Hungarian brothers and sisters.
Right.
So, yeah, we share patients. And it is true. It's like, again, it's just simple. I mean, I know this may sound too good to believe, but it really is just the way life works. It's just science. It's just biochemistry.
It's physics.
As Ann likes to say, it's the law, and you can't change the law.
I love it. Okay, so just so people can find you, ddcenters.com.
Yes.
Where else? Anywhere else, or is that the one spot?
Yeah, ddcenters.com, and from there you can go to all the other different. We're changing. We're trying to become better at getting the message to people because, again, our goal is to prevent 1 million people over the next 3 years from getting cancer, to help 10,000 cancer patients get better outcomes and with standard of care, and to train 10,000 doctors. And we know if we do that, it's a paradigm shift, and we may someday get to the point of having enough knowledge to make cancer a choice.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate it. Way more than 10,000 people are going to hear this. So it's a good start, and we'll hopefully be, the match that lights something bigger. But this is the last question that I always ask all my guests, Q. What is the most radical thing that you have done in the last month or so?
Last month or so. Geez, I live a radical life, man. That's
too many to say.
Yeah, seriously.
You can say the last week.
It took me 63 years, but I'm getting there. Let's see. What's the most? I know. Hard this guy. No. I think really the most. Again, everything I do. I'm not. Everything. It's like being a kid in a candy store again. Everything is new. So I think I have no. My life is radical.
Geez, I'm jealous.
When you're 63, come and see me.
When everything in your life is radical, it's hard to distinguish. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you and Ann so much, and I encourage people to check out DD Centers, and I will put the information for that in the show notes. We'll get lots of those articles that you're talking about in the show notes so people can go to that.
And maybe we can do a study together. I want to measure, deuterium levels in your audience.
I would love to measure deuterium levels in my clients, so we'll figure it out. So, all right, guys, that is all for today. Stay radical. I'll talk to you guys soon. All righty, you guys, that was deuterium. How cool is that stuff? Again, if you have questions, if you want to learn more about this, I would recommend checking out my website, carnivoremd.com/deuterium. Ashley Armstrong of the Strong Sisters on Instagram. This is Ashley and Sarah Armstrong, who I am collaborating on the Carnivore Code cookbook with. She wrote a blog post. She is a 5th-year PhD student in mechanical engineering and super interested in deuterium herself. So there's a blog post there that'll give you more information. There's more information about the study and the discounts from the Center for Deuterium Depletion on my website. It's ddcenters.com. You can use the code Saladino. And you got to sign up through the link in that blog post for the study. You can get your deuterium levels checked for $150, which is more than half off normal. Give you a baseline and then maybe recheck in a few months once you've done some of the interventions that we talk about in this podcast and in the blog post to change your deuterium levels. So my deuterium level was 142, I believe. And I think there was a difference between the saliva and the breath test. and the saliva was a little bit lower, I think 139 or 140, which is not amazing. It's not horrible, but it's not amazing. And as you know, I eat entirely grass-fed, grass-finished animal meat and organs. And so one of the recommendations I got from the Center for Deuterium Depletion was to think about where I was sourcing my meat from and where I was getting my water from. And so this is an interesting thing. People always talk about deuterium depleted water. And though I think this is the least important aspect of the whole thing, it can be an important aspect. And we talk about this in the blog post on my website, the idea that some water is lower than deuterium than others. And if people are really sick, gosh, I mean, I think a trial of deuterium depleted water would be totally reasonable. It's not cheap, but it's not the cost of diamonds or gold. And for a couple of months, I think someone could spend a couple $100 on deuterium depleted water and see if there's an improvement in their condition. I have not used deuterium depleted water myself, but I am interested to retest my deuterium level as I've now begun getting my water from a spring-fed source that's a little different than what it was before. Before I was using kind of filtered water that might have been municipal, so that might have been contributing. And now I'm getting it from a very good spring-fed source. And then the other things in the blog post that we talk about are things I'm going to keep focusing on. I'm going to keep doing a high-fat carnivore diet. I'm now sourcing the majority of my food, thankfully, from White Oak Pastures. I would love to have some of their meat tested for deuterium levels. When I was in Los Angeles, the people at the Center for Deuterium Depletion had tested a number of the meats from local producers there, like Belcampo, who are not a sponsor of this podcast, but they're amazing people too. And the Belcampo meats, which are grass-fed, were very low in deuterium, relatively speaking. And so I think that if our numbers are not where they want us to be, then we have to look at sleep, we have to look at stress. I've been stressed recently. I've been doing a lot. I'm juggling a lot of plates right now. I'm spinning a lot of plates, you guys. And we have to look at water and we have to look at food. And I think if we do the best of those things, that's what we need to do. And that's how we can assure ourselves to be as healthy as possible. I don't think we all need to do deuterium depleted water. I don't think many of us need to do deuterium depleted water. But if I were very sick, if someone I knew were very sick, I would definitely do a trial of it or at least consider it. But the take-home message from this podcast, in my mind, is do the things that all of you guys are probably already doing. And how interesting is it that a carnivore diet is low deuterium? How cool is that, you guys? Because the deuterium concentrates in plants and carbohydrates. We're way ahead of the curve. We're way ahead of the curve. So I appreciate you all. Check out my website, carnivoremd.com/deuterium. You can use the code Saladino at ddcenters.com. Sign up for the study. It would be so cool to get deuterium levels on carnivores. That is a really cheap price on getting a deuterium level. You can also get discounts on consults with them, et cetera, et cetera. Check out White Oak Pastures. Use the code CarnivoreMD for 10% off. I appreciate these guys so much. And we're going to have a carnivore meetup there. We're going to have a carnivore sort of like retreat gathering party in December. Stay tuned. And next week is probably going to be, I don't know, it's a mystery week. It might be my buddy Monsell talking about hunting. It might be Chris Palmer, who's a very well-known psychiatrist from Harvard, coming on the podcast. One of those two. And maybe it's going to be about Katsu. We got all kinds of cool stuff coming up. We got Katsu, we got BFR with Dr. Mercola, all kinds of cool stuff coming. Sign up for my newsletter, carnivoremd.com. I appreciate you guys so much. The book is rocking. I posted the cover of the book on Instagram. It's also on my website. You can go to carnivoremd.com/book and see the cover of my book. A lot of updates coming soon. Guess what? Mark Sisson wrote the foreword. It's awesome. I have some amazing friends. So fortunate to be in this community and to have the support of OGs like Ben Greenfield and Mark Sisson and Dr. Mercola. Appreciate them all. I appreciate you guys all. Love you all. Keep letting me know how I can do better, and I will see you in the next episode. Stay radical.